What do you think about when you hear the phrase interactive film?
Turn down for what? Turn down for what?
Depending on your level of familiarity with the medium, it might mean different things. I'm going to assume that you're a pro. And because you're a pro, I'm not going to start with the obvious things. You already know what I'm talking about, and I will mention it. But first of all, let's get the deep cuts out of the way. Because you're a fan of interactive film, then the first thing that pops immediately into your head is, of course, Possibilia, the 2014 film by experimental filmmaking outfit Daniels. And why wouldn't it be? Although Daniels are now Oscar award-winning filmmakers, Possibilia was their first experimental film to be shown at the Tribeca Film Festival, as well as being selected at Sundance. Of course, you can't actually play Possibilia anymore because the platform it was built on just shut down last year in favour of making interactive advertisements instead. Of course, if you're familiar with the medium, because you're even a fan of the medium, then you've also played the award-winning and gut-crushingly impactful Attentat 1942, the interactive documentary in which players investigate the protagonist's family history and learn the truth about various events that took place in Nazi-occupied Czech lands during World War II. And of course, because you're a fan, you've similarly played Her Story by the interactive filmmaking luminary Sam Barlow, in which players must solve the mystery of a missing man by viewing police interview clips of his wife. You might also have played Barlow's later work, Not for Broadcast, a political satire about the future of Britain in an increasingly mediated world, with you having to make an edit on the fly. If you happen to live in or spend a lot of time in China, where FMV games have had a little bit of a renaissance in the past, you might have heard of the espionage thriller The Invisible Guardian, or the very new Game of Fate 2, A Century's Promise, that's coming out this year and uses a first-person perspective to explore love in the times of war. Even if you're not big into films, you might have played the Game Award-winning Alan Wake 2 from Finnish company Remedy Entertainment, that in 2024 blended gameplay and movie sequences seamlessly together, setting a new and exciting high bar for what an interactive film could be. Of course, you're a fan of the medium, so that way you already know that interactive films have been around since at least the 1960s, if not earlier, and that they've had varying presence in mainstream media ever since. You also know, of course, that I'm missing out a ludicrous number of standout interactive film titles here. As a fan of the medium, you also already know that many interactive films and games are made using professional game engines like Unity or the Unreal Game Engine. Maybe you've also heard of the specialist tools made explicitly for the purpose of making interactive films, like, for example, how the BBC used to have some free tools available on their website to help people make branching stories, or you've heard of platforms like Echo, Wirewax, and Stornoway that exist to help people make this very special type of film. Films with choices. If you really know your stuff, then you might have heard of Clint, Adventure, Hihaho, Kaltura, or even the open source alternatives like H5P and FrameTrail.
I do think it's important to mention before going any further that some of the tools I have mentioned, like the BBC stuff, doesn't exist anymore, and some of the other tools that you could use, like Hihaho in particular, are so insanely expensive that you couldn't use them unless you're like a professional enterprise client. But that's kind of interesting in itself, in a way that enterprise clients like see interactive film as something worth investing in, but I'll make a different video about that at some point in the future.
If you're not a fan of interactive film, then what you think about when you hear the term is probably drastically different. Maybe you're the chronically online type, the type that prefers memes to sunlight. If so, maybe you've heard of the terrible early experiments with interactive filmmaking that make for great engagement bait on streaming platforms and in short videos. If that's the case, interactive filmmaking might bring to mind something like the beautifully Don Bluth animated, but bizarrely difficult to play, Dragon's Lair. A game where there are no explicit controls, just vibes. Maybe you've watched a reaction video to Night Trap, an FMV game whose premise alone was so bad it's largely responsible for games having ratings today. And maybe, just maybe, you've played or at least seen playthroughs unhinged movie games of the 1990s, such as Steven Spielberg's Director's Chair, or the brilliantly awful Ripper, with its excellent guest appearance from Christopher Walken. If this sounds more like you, then I bet you've spent enough time on YouTube or TikTok to have seen the somewhat limited, but nonetheless undeniably interactive features that can be added to videos if you want them. You might logically assume that making interactive films at a professional level is probably a bit like this, but maybe with a slightly higher barrier for entry. And while you're wrong, I want you to know that you're the sensible one. It's the world that's made a grievous mistake here. But again, I'm jumping ahead.
When you really stop to think about it and consider some of the definitions of interactive film that are possible, like if you think that you can define an interactive film as video clips that you can interact with by having options like Kino Automat from the 1960s, or if you think that interactive video has to have a more video game-like element to it, you can end up in a situation where everything becomes an interactive film. Maybe you can interact with a film by going on a forum online and writing fan fiction about it. Maybe the limits of interactivity extend to video games with cutscenes, like maybe Metal Gear Solid 4 is a video game, maybe Final Fantasy 7 is a video game. Maybe Life is a video game, except the cutscenes are actually just movies that you go and see. Maybe I'm a video game and you're a video. Maybe I don't even, what, are you what? I'm not what?
No, let's be reasonable. We all know what an interactive film really is because it's Bandersnatch. If we choose to put aside the questions of what exact features make an interactive film, and instead choose to just name the thing we know is an interactive film, I think the question, what is an interactive film, becomes much more interesting. Even if you're a totally normal person, even the kind of person that's seen the world beyond their phone once or twice, I would wager that you have heard of Black Mirror Bandersnatch, the 2018 interactive movie from series creator and old school games enthusiast Charlie Brooker that undeniably brought interactive film back into the mainstream consciousness. If most people were asked, what is an interactive film, the answer you're going to be given is Bandersnatch. It's a selection of film clips strung together by the choices that you make. Sometimes you have to make choices within a time limit, sometimes not. Sometimes your choices end up looping back on themselves, with the characters in the film seemingly becoming increasingly aware of your choices and actions. And honestly, I think there's a really good reason why we should consider Black Mirror Bandersnatch to be the definitive answer to the question, what is an interactive film? Aside from the fact that it has a lot in common with something like Kino Automat, one of the earliest examples of interactive film, it's also undeniably a film. Even though it was made in a time when video games exist, it's not a video game. It is a film. All of the choices and actions that a player can make actually help to uncover new and exciting details to the film itself.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I think about when I hear what's an interactive film, or what do you think about when you hear interactive film? I think Bandersnatch, because it's Bandersnatch. But I don't know. Look, maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe interactive film means something completely different these days. Maybe interactive film is what you do when you put TikToks out in the TikTok verse. Maybe interactive film is, sharing films with the people that you love. I don't know. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things out there that interactive film could be. And, I want to make a lot more content about some of the stuff that interactive film actually is becoming now. Whether that's for the better of the medium or not. But anyway, let me know what you think. Talk to you soon.